Hi guys, I wanted to make a part two to the video, are you studying the Bible correctly? Just to give some real examples from the Bible, okay? So that, you can understand better what I meant, and also so that you guys can be blessed by this video in whatever way the Lord chooses. So I'm going to start with Colossians 1, where Jesus is called the firstborn of all creation. Now, some people will read that and they'll be like, what? He's the firstborn of all creation? So he's a created being, they'll say. I've heard Jehovah Witnesses use this to kind of persuade Christians that Jesus is not, one with the eternal God, that he's a created being. And that's not what the verse means. The verse does not mean that Jesus is a created being, okay? And I'll explain why. But this is one of those verses that can be misunderstood. And it's a verse that we need to approach carefully. Now we know from John 1, chapter 1, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and it says that He was with God in the beginning, right? So we know that it just was. In the beginning, the Word was. He just existed. We know that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Okay, that he's not a created being. Okay, so how do we understand this verse then that says he's the firstborn of all creation? Well, first of all, look at the passage itself. The passage itself, that whole passage, it's talking about the supremacy of Christ, how he is greater than everything created, how he has authority, how he has power. It's talking. This is what the whole passage is talking about, right? So keep that in mind. Now also the word firstborn, okay, if you look at the original text that was written in Greek, I do speak Greek. I'm from a Greek island, or it's Cypriot. I'm Cypriot. The word used is prototokos, right? Prototokos means firstborn, as it's translated. But if the author meant to say first created, he would have used a more specific word. He would have used prodoktistos. Okay? Now I know that doesn't mean much to you, right? But let me just give you some more information. Okay, the word firstborn is used actually many times in the Bible. Okay, so if you read Psalm 89, right, verse 20, you see that he starts talking about David. Okay, King David. And if you go down to verse 27, it says that he's going to make him the firstborn. Now hold on a second. David is the lastborn of Jesse. I think Jesse had like 10 sons and he was the lastborn. So how is he going to make him the firstborn? What's it talking about? Okay, and then, well, let me just explain. In their culture, in Jewish culture, in Israel, the firstborn son had more rights than the rest of the children. Okay, they were allowed a double portion of the inheritance than everyone else was allowed. When the father was dead or absent, they would assume the authority that the father would have for the family. Okay, the firstborn was a position. It was a right. Okay, we know that Esau sold his birthright to Jacob. Okay, another example of this idea of firstborn we see in Genesis. Okay, in Genesis 41, verse 51 to 52, if you want to look at it. Joseph had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Okay, and Manasseh is the eldest, right? But in Jeremiah 31, verse 9, it says, Ephraim, my firstborn. So he calls the second child the firstborn, even though the first child is the firstborn. And the reason is because Joseph's father gave the blessing of the firstborn to the second child, right? So the second child got the position of the firstborn. Okay, got the rights, the double inheritance, and the authority and everything that comes with that position. right? So when you say firstborn in their culture, it actually means um, the child that has the firstborn rights. Okay, and this is why Jesus in Colossians 1 is called the firstborn of all creation, because he's the one, he's the one who represents humanity, who is the firstborn, who has the rights, the authority, and we're sharing in his inheritance when we're in Christ. Okay, so I hope that clears that up. There's other verses in the Bible, of course, that can be a bit confusing or misunderstood, and it's important for us to look deep. I'll give just one more example. In Matthew 5, we know that Jesus is talking about not giving an oath, right? Let me actually find it, because, yeah. So, what's Jesus talking here? He says, "Again you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn." Okay, but I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Now here's the thing, a friend of mine, he goes to me, you know what? In Revelation 10, verse 5, the angel gives an oath. Okay, so, he started to think that the angel was sinning. Okay, and I thought about this a bit, and I'm like, hold on, this doesn't make sense, okay? Because we know that the Bible is clear, and I think it's in Psalm 5, that wickedness cannot dwell with God, okay? That evil cannot be in his presence, that the holy angels need to be holy. They cannot be sinful and be in the presence of a holy God. This is why we needed the forgiveness of sins that Jesus brought, so that we could be reconciled to God, right? Because in our sinful state, we cannot be there. So there must be another explanation. So I looked a bit deeper, and I saw that even Paul, the Apostle Paul, he makes oaths in the scriptures. So if you look at, do I have them written here? I think I have them here. If you want to look up, like I said, don't always take my word for things, right? It's good to look these things up. So in Romans 1:9, 2 Corinthians 1:23, Philippians 1:8, in these scriptures, Paul makes oaths. And we know that Paul was inspired by the Holy Spirit, and that the scriptures are inerrant and true and good. They cannot be sinful, right? So what's going on? What is Jesus talking about? Well, if we look carefully at the passage, and this is also in James as well, this is mentioned, and if we look at a little bit at what's going on in those days, what they would do in those days is they would make an oath that they would do something, right? But they had these little tricks, because what they would do, they like to manipulate the law, especially the Pharisees. Okay, I mean in Matthew 23, I think it is, Jesus reprimands them, and he says to them, "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces." Hold on. No, further down, sorry. Matthew 23, verse 16. "Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath." Right? And then he says, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. So what they would do in those days is they'd say, okay, you know what? I'll make an oath, but if I make it on the gifts of the temple, then I have to keep it. But if I make it on the temple, then I don't have to keep it. So they'd find these loopholes so that they wouldn't have to keep their oaths. So let me just fix the camera a bit here. Okay, so Jesus is telling them, you know what? Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Have a heart of truth. Have a heart that is like your Father in heaven, who, when he says he's going to do something, he does it. Okay? Be my disciples. Let people be known. Let you just be known and walk in truth. And when you say you're going to do something, just do it. Okay? But Jesus is talking about giving an oath in this passage, from what I understand, giving an oath about doing something. All right? Fulfilling your oath. because he says, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. So it's talking about performing something, right? And that's why he's saying you can't change a thing. You can't even change the color of your hair from from white or black, right? So he's talking about what you're performing an oath. So I made an oath that I'll do something. I have to do it. Okay. When the angel takes an oath, or when Paul makes oaths, they're not taking oaths about doing something. They're taking oaths about what I'm saying is true. What I'm saying, let God, be my witness. They're saying, that what I'm saying is true. Okay. Now we should avoid taking oaths, as Jesus said, that people should just take our word for it. But in this case, there was nothing for them to do. Okay, there was nothing for them to do that they might fail in doing. Because if you take an oath about doing something and you swear on God, you can't predict the future. You can't know tomorrow if you'll be alive to fulfill that oath, or if you'll be handicapped, or what can happen. But if you're, in this case, it's different, right? Even in I think when Jesus is standing before all these elders, Pharisees, and whoever they were, who and they go to him, I adjourn you, kind of like swear and tell me the truth. Are you the Son of God, right? And Jesus gives a partial response to that. And if it was a sin to do that, Jesus would not have responded, because we know that Jesus is without sin. Okay, so that's another thing that you can misunderstand, perhaps. All right, so like I said, it's good to read the Bible for ourselves. There's a lot in here that we can just read on our own, understand. We don't really need anyone else to explain to us. There are some very good, clear teachings, but there are some teachings in here that can be misunderstood. So it's good to check what we're reading. Make sure we understood it correctly, that there's nothing that we've missed. All right, and I've already given in the first video examples of this. We're a body. We're here to support each other and love each other and care for each other and guide each other, and help each other, and point each other to Jesus and to the truth. And that's what I'm trying to do here as well. So God bless you guys.